The wind howled outside the small, wooden cabin as rain tapped relentlessly against the windows. The mountains were cloaked in fog, and the world beyond looked like a watercolor painting that had been blurred by tears. Inside, on the edge of a worn couch, sat Amelia Carter, her hands trembling around a cup of cold coffee she'd forgotten to drink. Her Bible lay open on the table, pages wrinkled, some still wet from the tears she'd spilled the night before. The verse she had underlined months ago stared back at her like a quiet rebuke. "Be still, and know that I am God." But she couldn't be still. And she didn't know. Not anymore. 3 months ago, she had been full of fire and faith. She led worship at her church every Sunday, prayed for others with conviction, and told everyone who would listen that God spoke to those who listened. But then, her life cracked open. It began with a phone call. The kind that changes everything. Her younger brother, Daniel, had been in a car accident on his way home from college. He didn't make it. That night, Amelia prayed until her throat burned. She begged God for answers. For peace. For something. But heaven was silent. Days passed. Then weeks. Then months. The silence grew heavier with each sunrise. Now, in that mountain cabin, her retreat from the noise of the world, she sat staring at her Bible, wondering if she'd imagined all of it. The miracles, the answered prayers, the voice she thought she once heard deep within her soul. Maybe she'd been wrong. Maybe God wasn't listening. It was the third night of her solitude when the storm hit. Power flickered out, plunging the cabin into darkness. She lit a single candle and wrapped herself in a blanket, trying to ignore the ache of loneliness pressing down on her chest. "God," she whispered into the shadows, her voice cracking. "Why can't I hear you anymore?" The candle flickered. No thunderous voice. No whisper in the wind. Just the creaking of the wooden beams, and the endless pounding of rain. She closed her eyes, and remembered the day she'd first believed. She had been 15. Standing in a crowded revival tent, hands lifted high, feeling warmth rush through her chest, like sunlight breaking through clouds. That moment had changed her life. She had known God's voice then. Not in words, but in peace. Now there was only emptiness. The next morning, Amelia woke to gray light spilling through the window. Her head throbbed from crying. And her Bible still lay open where she'd left it. She reached for it half-heartedly, and flipped through the pages, her fingers landing on a verse from Job. "I go forward, but he is not there, backward but I cannot perceive him. Yet he knows the way that I take." She stopped. Read it again. And something deep within her, something fragile and half-broken, stirred. Job had lost everything and still, he'd chosen to believe that God knew his path, even when he couldn't hear him. Amelia closed the Bible and whispered, "Then maybe faith isn't about hearing." But even as she said it, her heart resisted. She wanted to feel something, a sign, a word, a spark of the divine. So she decided to do the only thing she still knew how to do. She prayed. It wasn't an eloquent prayer. It wasn't the kind she used to lead from a stage or post about online. It was raw, jagged, full of questions. "God, I don't even know what to say anymore," she began, her voice trembling. "I don't feel you. I don't hear you. I don't even know if you're still here. But if you are, please, don't let go of me." Her words hung in the air. The silence that followed wasn't empty this time. It was heavy, sacred, almost. She felt something like a pulse, not in the room, but inside her chest. Not a voice. Not even a whisper. just a reminder that maybe silence didn't mean absence. That night, she dreamed. She was standing in a vast field under a dark sky. All around her were broken pieces of glass, glittering like stars fallen to the ground. Each shard reflected a memory. Moments when she'd heard God clearly. Her baptism. Her brother's laughter. A sunset she'd once watched with tears of gratitude. In the dream, she knelt to pick up a piece, and as she did, she heard a voice. Not loud, but certain. I never stopped speaking. You just stopped trusting that I could speak in the silence. Amelia gasped awake, tears on her cheeks. The dream felt more real than anything she'd felt in months. She sat up, breathing hard, and whispered, "If that was you, Lord, I'm listening again." The next morning, the storm had passed. Sunlight poured through the window, washing the cabin in gold. The world outside shimmered with dew, fresh, new, alive. Amelia stepped outside and closed her eyes. The air smelled like pine and rain. She heard the distant chirping of birds and the soft rush of a nearby stream. And then, in the quiet of her heart, she prayed again. Slowly, word by word. Lord, when I can't hear your voice, help me trust that you're still near. When the world is silent, remind me that silence can still hold your presence. When my faith shakes, hold me steady. When I feel lost, let me find you in the stillness. This time, the prayer didn't feel like it was bouncing off the ceiling. It felt like it was rising, carried on the morning air. Amelia stayed in that cabin for 3 more days. She wrote letters to God, not expecting replies, but needing to speak. Each one began with honesty and ended with surrender. One said, "I thought hearing you meant you loved me. Now I think trusting you in the silence might mean I love you back." Another read, "If faith isn't the fire I feel, it's the ashes I choose to believe can still burn." By the time she packed her bags to leave, she wasn't sure if she'd heard God's voice again. Not in the way she once did. But she felt something deeper. Peace. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was enough. 2 weeks later, Amelia returned home. Her church looked the same, though her heart didn't. She walked in quietly one Sunday morning, and sat in the back pew. During worship, the pastor spoke about how God sometimes goes silent not to punish, but to strengthen. Like a teacher who steps back during a test, trusting the student to remember what they've learned. Amelia smiled softly. She closed her eyes and whispered the prayer she had written in the cabin. The one that had become her anchor. Lord, when I can't hear your voice, help me remember that you're still here. And in that moment, surrounded by familiar faces and familiar songs, she felt it. Not a voice in her ear, but a warmth in her soul. It wasn't loud, but it was love. Months passed. Amelia began sharing her story, not as a tale of triumph, but as a testimony of trust. She spoke to small groups, women's ministries, even online, where countless others admitted they too felt the weight of God's silence. One night, after a meeting, a young woman approached her with tearful eyes. "I've been praying for months," the woman said, "and I don't hear anything. I thought maybe God forgot me." Amelia reached out, took her hands, and smiled gently. "He hasn't forgotten you," she said. "Sometimes, silence is the sound of God holding you close." The woman began to cry. And so did Amelia. Because she knew, deeply now, that every silent season had been sacred. Every unanswered prayer had been heard. And that God had been speaking all along. Just not in the way she expected. One evening, Amelia sat by her window, as the sun dipped below the horizon. The world outside glowed with soft orange light, and the air was still. She opened her journal and began to write. "This is the prayer I say when I can't hear God's voice," she began. Her pen moved slowly, but surely. "Lord, you don't owe me answers, only your presence. Teach me to trust that you are here, even when the heavens are quiet. When my heart aches to hear you, remind me that faith is not a feeling. It's a choice. Let me rest, not in what I hear, but in who you are." She paused, looking up at the sky. A single star blinked into view. Faint, but steady. She smiled. Sometimes, she thought, the quietest moments hold the loudest love. And as night settled softly around her, Amelia whispered one last prayer, before closing her eyes. "Lord, thank you for the silence, because it's there I finally learned how to listen."